Welcome back to the Jenny McCarthy Show on SiriusXM Stars.
Welcome back to the Jenny McCarthy, Donnie Wahlberg Show. We're very excited about our next guests. Casey Sherman and Dave Wedge have a book called Hunting Whitey, the inside story of the capture and killing of America's most wanted crime boss. And of course, I've got my Boston husband here.
That's right. You're taking me back home with this one right now.
Taking you back home. Hi, Casey and Dave. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having us, guys.
Hi, guys. How are you?
Now, Casey's from Boston. Dave, are you from Boston?
I'm a Brockton boy, Donnie. I'm a Brockton boy.
That's a whole nother tough area, man.
Father Flavin.
Father Flavin, that's right. St. Coleman's Church. Come on, buddy.
I love how we refer to, that's why Boston reminds me of Chicago. We go by parishes.
Yep.
You know, that's how you know where someone is, by their parish or
That's
or their father. The book Hunting Whitey, you guys, is this something that you obviously you were close to it in Boston, but was it something that interested you your whole life, or just recently said, let's do this?
Yeah, no, I mean, we covered the Whitey Bulger saga as journalists in Boston for well over 20 years. I lived in South Boston in the early 1990s at the height of Whitey Bulger's power, right on, 10 Thomas Park. I, bumped into Whitey Bulger on occasion, certainly knew a few of his gang members as well. And Dave obviously covered the case as a journalist for Boston, the Boston Herald. And then when Whitey Bulger went on the run for so many years, we followed all the different sightings. And ultimately, when he was murdered in prison, that's when we said, okay, it's time for us to dip our toes into the Whitey water.
Right. Can you guys just give a summary of who this man was and why so many people cared about capturing him?
Yeah, so Whitey Bulger, I look at him as really one of the, the holy triumvirate of evil in the annals of American criminal history with, with Al Capone and John Gotti. Really, Whitey Bulger's right in that world there. He basically ran the rackets in Boston for 30, 40 years. He corrupted several FBI agents and other law enforcement officers, really cut a devil's deal with them to get information to keep himself free while feeding them information about the Italian mafia in Boston. Mm-hmm. And he took down the mob in the North End with his information. Ultimately, he was tipped off that there was a major indictment coming against him. And he took off and was on the run for 16 years. And oh, by the way, before he took off, he killed at least 19 people.
Wow. And basically, he went on the run for 16 years, but he had to have had a plan in place, I would imagine.
Certainly, and that's what I think makes him, much smarter than the Al Capones of the world, is because Whitey Bulger had been planning his escape for several decades, going across the country and across the world, opening safety deposit boxes, stuffing in wads of cash. Bulger went on the lam with upwards to about, possibly $30 million. A lot of that money still has never been found. So, hunting Whitey is really a cat and mouse game between a gangster and his lion and winter phase of his life, because Bulger was a lot older than he was as from the tough guy that he was in South Boston. He was a senior citizen on the run, still trying to be elusive, while the FBI was determined to catch him and, clear their name.
How was he able to stay hidden really in plain sight for so long?
In Santa Monica.
Did he have help that we don't know about? Do you guys touch on that in the book? And and how did he
that's the gene
get caught? Really, and how did he get caught? If he was able to stay away for so long, how does he end up getting caught so casually and carelessly?
Well, like Casey mentioned, he was kind of planning this escape his whole life. And, the fact that he got tipped off to the indictment gave him a head start on everybody. And, and Whitey remained a step ahead of law enforcement every step of the way. And we chronicle that in the book where, he's in New Orleans. He's almost caught there. He had a couple near misses out in California, in Santa Monica, San Diego. He was a student of crime, but he's also a student of being a fugitive. When he was found in Santa Monica in his hideout there at the Princess Eugenia Apartments, right near Palisades Park, he was less than a mile from the police station, but he had all sorts of fake IDs, in addition to the guns and the cash and all that, $800,000 in cash. He also had several books about how to be a fugitive. He spent time in Alcatraz as a young man. One of his first real jail bids was in Alcatraz, and he was a student of those escapes there. He studied what those guys did. So he really spent his entire life being an arch criminal, but also being ready to be the best fugitive that ever lived. And he really was.
And the book again is Hunting Whitey, the inside story of the capture and killing of America's most wanted crime boss. Because obviously I've heard about him growing up, and then I remember his capture made news. It was like, oh my God, he's in Santa Monica. This was like the #1 FBI wanted list, this man, correct? And then they decided to switch and say, okay, let's maybe hunt down his wife, his girl. I'm not sure if they were married. I can't remember. And they kind of focused on her and got pictures, because they really did a good job covering their faces. The FBI never really got a good profile face picture of them. And so they went to a plastic surgeon of hers, and that's where they got her photo. And that's where the real finale started to come to fruition, correct?
Exactly. And, I mean, this is a book and a story about perseverance. You had a new generation of FBI agent working in Boston. Now, they didn't know Whitey Bulger. They didn't know any of the corrupt agents that had preceded them in the office. And they had a mission, which was go out and find Bigfoot. And that's basically how they referred to Whitey Bulger at the time. And here in walks a young female FBI agent named Noreen Gleason. And she looks at all the guys in the FBI office and she says, wait a minute, how long have we been trying to find Whitey Bulger? Over a decade. And what have we been doing to look for him? Well, we put his name and face on America's Most Wanted. Now, those appearances on that television show generated dozens, if not thousands of tips over time. And basically, it was, I saw an elderly white man in a baseball cap in sunglasses walking down the street.
Amazing thing about the word perseverance, and I want to say this carefully because perseverance is a word we generally attribute in a complimentary way to people, right? So the agents looking for him had a lot of perseverance. But most people who are on the run, they get exhausted from looking over their shoulder. And a lot of stories I've heard of people being on the run like that, they get so tired of looking over their shoulder, they just want to give up. He didn't. I mean, he just kept going and going. I mean, in many ways, he had the perseverance too to stay on the run. I don't mean a complimentary. I mean, he's an evil guy. From everything I've ever heard of anyone who crossed his path, his eyes. They said he had the eyes of death. His eyes look like shark eyeballs. But I mean, what is it? Because he had the resources and the money. What do you think allowed him to just keep going and going and living that way? Constantly looking over your shoulder and being in hiding.
Well, he was driven to never be caught. And, when you guys read this book, we have some interesting information from his own mouth, things that he told FBI agents, things that he told former inmates that he served time with, where he wanted to keep the mystery of Whitey Bulger going forever. He told people that if he was getting really sick and he was going to die, he was going to find a mine shaft in Nevada and throw himself into it so that he'd never be caught. Because he hated the FBI that much that he wanted them to never find his body. He wanted people to always wonder, where is he? Whatever happened to Whitey Bulger? He wanted to be that eternal mystery that people would talk about till the end of time. And unfortunately for him, these young agents that Casey just described, led by Noreen Gleason and several other folks in the Boston office that were disgusted with the corruption that marred that office for decades, they turned the tables on Whitey Bulger. They turned the focus of the investigation on to Catherine Gregg, and that's how they tracked him down, and they foiled his plan. But to your point, Donnie, he persevered. He was driven. I don't think he really thought he would ever be caught. I think he thought he was smarter than everybody else.
Mm-hmm. Where in the book is, you're right, I can't wait to read this, especially this cat and mouse game. Where was another time that it was they were so close to getting them? Was it New Orleans? Which city and which situation?
Well, I'll tell you, it's a kind of a art imitates life situation. It actually happened in San Diego, California in 2006, I believe. And that was the opening day of the film The Departed, which was a fictionalized version version of the Whitey Bulger saga. Now, Whitey Bulger was also willing to gamble his own freedom because he loved Hollywood. He loved his own mythology. He wanted to see himself portrayed on the big screen, allegedly by Jack Nicholson. And here he is at Horton Plaza watching the first screening of The Departed, and 4 rows away from him is a San Diego sheriff's deputy who happened to grow up in Massachusetts. And he spots Bulger. And he knows it's him because he's studied the Bulger case for years, which is what brought him to the first screening of The Departed as well. So as Bulger's watching Jack Nicholson on the screen, the sheriff's deputy is watching Bulger. And Bulger is shaking his head at times, very annoyed at some of the scenes depicting
I can see why, but go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. And after the film, the sheriff's deputy slowly leaves the theater, waits for Bulger. They spot each other, and he knows dead on it's Whitey Bulger. And he also sees a bulge under his polo shirt, and he knows that Bulger is armed. Now, immediately, the sheriff's deputy reaches for his ankle, and he had a pistol wrapped around his ankle, but he had just left his weapon at the courthouse in San Diego because he was testifying in a drug trial. So this police officer wasn't armed. Bulger was. So he watches Bulger get on a trolley to San Ysidro because Bulger's girlfriend was crossing the border into Mexico to get low-cost heart medication for Bulger. A chase ensues, and yet Bulger, even at that advanced age, was able to slip through that dragnet.
Wow.
That is unbelievable. Crazy. And the whole book must be like this.
It is. We got unprecedented access to the FBI investigation. We actually take Bulger's life from, his life on the run as a fugitive all the way through all the time he spent in prison. We have 70 letters that Bulger wrote in his own hand describing even how he was captured. So it's for the first time we really get into Bulger's head. And ultimately, we also corresponded with the prime suspect in Bulger's murder, who takes us into Bulger's cell the day that he was killed.
Holy shit.
A Massachusetts mobster.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Wow. Now, is there any connection between this particular mobster and anyone that, did he have relatives or, ties to someone that Whitey Bulger set up or snitched on or, got in trouble years before?
Yeah, so there is a pretty stunning connection, actually. The guy's name's Freddie Gius, and he ran out of the Springfield mob out in Western Mass, Donnie, and that mob is a different faction than the Boston mob. The Springfield mob answers to New York. The Boston mob answers to Providence. Freddie Gius was an enforcer for the mob out there in Springfield and was serving life for taking down the capo out there, a guy named Big Al Bruno. And when Freddie was in jail, he befriended a guy named Fred Weichel. You might recognize that name, Donnie. Fred Weichel is one of the guys that Whitey falsely fingered for a homicide in Braintree in the 1980s, put Freddie Weichel in jail for 36 years. And Freddie Weichel and Freddie Gius were buddies when they served time in Shirley in Massachusetts. So in walks Whitey Bulger into this prison in West Virginia, and he's put into a literal lion's den where Freddie Gius and some other Massachusetts mobsters are waiting for him. Another guy named Paul DiCollegiero from Burlington. He was doing time for cutting off a girl's head up in north of Boston. Really, there's a lot of questions that need to be answered, and we get into this a lot in the book about why the Bureau of Prisons made that decision to let Bulger into this particular prison.
That was my question.
It was a bad
exactly.
decision.
And how long did he last in prison? How long was he there for?
Well, he was convicted and he went through 3 different prisons. The first prison that he was housed at was in Tucson, Arizona. And within a month that he's there was an assassination attempt on his life. Another inmate stabbed Bulger in the skull. And that story has never been told before. Bulger was rushed to the infirmary, almost bled out there. And when he was healed and recovered, they sent him to a real shithole in Florida, where Bulger now is in a wheelchair. Inmates are trying to steal his sneakers in the prison yard because he wasn't the tough young gangster. He was an elderly gangster, barely holding on. And Whitey Bulger got into an argument with one of the staff nurses and said, "Your day of reckoning is coming." Now, within a short period of time, suddenly Bulger's health condition is upgraded so that he can be moved, not to a medical facility, but to Hazleton, which is nicknamed Misery Mountain. It's the worst prison in the United States, and that's ultimately where he was killed in less than a day since his arrival.
Wow. Holy shit. Less than a day. Yeah. This is why all my true crime lovers, you have to get this book. It's
some would say bad decision he was sent there. I'm sure there's a lot of people who would say good decision he was sent there. I know a few personally who would say the latter. So
sure.
One of the FBI agents that we interviewed for the book, who hunted Whitey for years, his name is Charlie Gianturco from Boston. And after he learned about Bulger's murder, he said, "Well, Casey and Dave, you live by the sword and you die by the sword." And then he said, No, fuck that. It makes Bulger sound too valiant. Bulger was a slug. He was a murderer of women, and good riddance to that kind of person.
Yeah, and worse than that as well. I've heard stories about kids and all other.
Oh, absolutely, and we chronicle that in the book, Donnie. We don't leave any stone unturned in terms of deconstructing Bulger's myth.
Yeah, one you asked at the beginning, Jenny, why we wrote this book, and there was, in addition to the reasons that Casey said, another one was to dispel these myths of Whitey as this benevolent gangster, this noble gangster that took care of his neighborhood. He did take care of a lot of people, but he took care of a lot of people in a bad way as well. He ruined a lot of families. He brought a lot of misery into not only South Boston, but the entire New England area. He put a lot of kids in the morgue and a lot of kids in jail.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think less so doing benevolent things than they were just people. We were just scared. I lived in Dorchester. I could walk to Southie in 10 minutes. I just didn't go there. Yeah, I would just, we just didn't. It was like, it's not because Southie was bad. It's because, we just figured we don't want to cross paths with Whitey Bulger and these guys.
His murders his crew's murders took place all over your old neighborhood. I mean, he killed a bunch of people in Savin Hill, Morrissey Boulevard, down on the waterfront. He wreaked havoc, Quincy. He wreaked havoc all over our area.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I remember bodies being dug up all over the place. And I had a friend who crossed paths with him and knew him well, a lot younger than him, who his uncle was murdered by Whitey Bulger. And he probably lived within 5 minutes of him in California. And had he found him first, he would have put an end to him right there in the street had he known he was there. But that's the uncanny thing about him. Literally, I mean, my friend would have killed him. And they were probably crossed paths and didn't even know. I mean, he was hiding so in plain sight. It's unbelievable, and certainly not to be celebrated, but certainly fascinating. And makes this book really good because nobody seems to get it right with him. Nobody seems to get it right. Certainly in the movies, it's. I'm sure he was pulling his hair out at Jack Nicholson in The Departed. Yeah, I'm sure he would have been. But it's good to see, and I'm excited to read this to see someone really getting into the real nuts and bolts of how this guy operated and what the hell he really did.
Honestly, if the two people I'm going to trust, it's you guys after following and doing the work for all of these years. Thank you. Hunting Whitey, the inside story of the capture and killing of America's most wanted crime boss. Pick it up now. Casey Sherman and Dave Wedge, thank you so much for joining us. We cannot wait to read this, and who knows, maybe we'll call you back with more questions after we're done reading it.
Fantastic. Look forward to it, guys.
Okay,
Thanks
great.
for having us, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Great talk, guys. Hope to talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.